Liberia's Democratic Dilemma, EPS Crackdown, Opposition Intimidation, and the Shadows of the Past. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, your uncompromising source of critical African news and analysis. I'm Abdul Karim Kargbo, born and raised in Africa. Today, we go deep into Liberia, where political tension is rising fast. The country's elite presidential guard, the Executive Protection Service, is under fire after issuing a chilling threat that could silence dissent and endanger democratic stability. Is this a national security measure or a step toward authoritarianism? Stay with us as we break it all down with facts, context, and fearless commentary. A new political storm is brewing in Liberia following an unprecedented warning from the Executive Protection Service, EPS, the country's elite presidential guard. The announcement made on April 30th by EPS Director Sam Gay stated that any protectee advocating insurrection, rebellion, or violent protest would lose their official protection. Though names were not mentioned, the context was unmistakable. The comments followed closely on the heels of a warning issued by former Vice President Jewel Howard Taylor at an opposition event, where she cautioned that Liberia risked descending into chaos if constitutional norms continued to be undermined. The EPS declaration triggered immediate backlash. The Citizens Movement for Change, CMC, a growing opposition force, condemned the move as a politically charged and unconstitutional threat aimed at muzzling dissent and weaponizing state security to suppress opposition figures. CMC Secretary General Wilfred Naywan Bangura did not mince words. Criticism is not insurrection, and opposition is not rebellion. EPS directive, a legal and constitutional tightrope. At the heart of the controversy lies the question, can a state security agency like the EPS unilaterally revoke protection from individuals without due process based on perceived political speech? According to Liberia's constitution, particularly Articles 11 and 21, all citizens are entitled to equal protection under the law and are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. By threatening to withdraw protection based on what appears to be political expression, the EPS could be violating both the letter and spirit of these constitutional protections. Furthermore, Article 77 of the Constitution guarantees the right to free speech and political association, cornerstones of Liberia's democratic system. The lack of judicial oversight or legal procedure in the EPS directive adds another layer of concern. In an interview with Front Page Africa, constitutional law expert T. Michael Jalla described the EPS's approach as a dangerous precedent that could unravel the post-war democratic gains. He added, Liberia cannot afford to slide into a governance style where executive organs act as both judge and executioner based on political calculations. CMC's position, a broader opposition narrative. The CMC's vocal reaction is not occurring in a vacuum. The party, seen as a rising third force in Liberian politics, has strategically aligned itself with public dissatisfaction over state capture, rising inflation, and political polarization. In this light, the EPS's statement provides a rallying cry for opposition actors seeking to expose what they see as a creeping erosion of democratic space. CMC's call for the national legislature to investigate the EPS directive and for the judiciary to intervene reflects a growing mistrust of executive power. We are sending a clear message that constitutional protections cannot be sacrificed at the altar of political convenience, said Bangura. International human rights observers, including Amnesty International and ECOWAS monitors, have yet to officially comment. However, diplomatic sources in Monrovia have privately expressed unease over the direction of political discourse, noting that Security organs must remain politically neutral, especially in post-conflict societies. The Al-Kop factor, a worrying echo of Liberia's past. Meanwhile, remarks by Ansu Dula, chairman of the All-Liberian Coalition Party, Al-Kop, a coalition member of the ruling Unity Party, have poured gasoline on the fire. In an open political event, Dula rebuked Howard Taylor's chaos warning with a controversial response. We are also masters of chaos. These comments have sparked national and international concern, given Al-Kop's historical link to the late Alhaji G.V. Kroma, leader of the Ulimoke faction during the Liberian Civil War. Though the party has since operated as a civilian entity, its origins are rooted in a militarized framework, and its former fighters were implicated in gross human rights abuses, as detailed in the Liberia Truth and Reconciliation Commission (TRC) Report 2009. Political analyst Miata Fanbula, writing in the Daily Observer, noted that Dulla's rhetoric invokes dangerous ghosts from Liberia's bloody past and undermines the Boakai administration's message of peace and reconciliation. She added, for a senior political figure to make such a statement without rebuke from the president speaks volumes. President Boakai's silence, tactical or troubling. President Joseph Boakai has yet to issue a formal statement addressing either the EPS directive or Dula's remarks. His administration has consistently emphasized good governance, rule of law, and post-conflict recovery. Following a recent Supreme Court ruling on legislative leadership, Boakai reiterated his commitment to stability and cooperation. However, critics argue that silence in moments of institutional overreach can be interpreted as tacit endorsement. Civil society organizations such as the Center for Democratic Empowerment, CDE, and Integrity Watch Liberia have called on the president to publicly distance his administration from threats to civil liberties. President Boakai's leadership will ultimately be judged by how he handles not just economic recovery, but also democratic resilience, said Benedict Sumo, a political science professor at the University of Liberia. This is not the time for ambiguity. Regional reflections. The authoritarian drift in West Africa. Liberia's situation is not occurring in isolation. Across West Africa, countries such as Senegal, Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Nigeria have witnessed tensions between opposition forces and executive power. In Sierra Leone, the controversial suspension of electoral data publication and arrests of political opponents under President Bayo drew international criticism. In Senegal, protests erupted in early 2024 after President Macky Sall attempted to delay elections. In this context, Liberia's EPS crackdown can be seen as part of a broader regional pattern where security agencies are increasingly used as tools of political control. This phenomenon poses a risk to fragile democracies emerging from conflict and undermines hard-won democratic norms championed by institutions like the African Union, AU, and ECOWAS. According to a 2024 report by the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, civic space in West Africa has shrunk by nearly 30% in the past 5 years, with state security interference in opposition politics cited as a primary driver. When African leaders misuse security institutions to silence critics, they erode the very legitimacy they seek to protect, said Dr. Fatou Bensouda, former chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, ICC, speaking at an AU Democracy Summit in Addis Ababa. International reactions, a cautious diplomatic watch. The international community, while not yet issuing formal statements on the Executive Protection Service (EPS) controversy, is closely monitoring developments in Liberia. Diplomatic missions in Monrovia, including the United States Embassy, the European Union delegation, and ECOWAS, have reportedly held internal consultations on the matter. A senior diplomat speaking anonymously to the Bold African Voice, BAV, noted, These are worrying signals. Liberia's democratic backsliding, if not contained early, could jeopardize future investments, governance cooperation, and regional stability. The United Nations office in Liberia, UNMIL, now operating with reduced post-mission presence since its withdrawal in 2018, has forwarded concerns to the UN Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs in New York. The African Union's Peace and Security Council is also expected to deliberate on Liberia's situation in its upcoming briefing on democratic norms in West Africa. While official condemnations are still pending, civil society actors and rights watchdogs abroad have started to speak out. Human Rights Watch issued a short bulletin warning that state security services must not be politicized, while Freedom House added Liberia to its watch list of countries experiencing early signs of democratic regression, implications for upcoming elections, and political stability. With Liberia expected to hold midterm senatorial and local elections in the coming year, these recent developments could have destabilizing effects on the political climate. Opposition leaders fear that the EPS's posture may signal the beginning of a broader crackdown on dissent in the lead up to the elections. Political analyst Cecilia Tamba, speaking to the Analyst newspaper, cautioned, when state agencies begin to act outside constitutional parameters in the name of national security, electoral credibility and public trust are the first casualties. Furthermore, the polarizing rhetoric from parties aligned with the ruling Unity Party, especially from ALCOP, could reawaken ethnic and wartime divisions that have remained dormant but unresolved in Liberia's post-conflict landscape. This risk is particularly pronounced in rural counties where political identity often intersects with past Civil War loyalties. The National Elections Commission, NEC, has yet to comment on the developments, but transparency advocates are urging the institution to issue guidelines ensuring non-interference by state security forces in political discourse. The judiciary's role and the test of constitutionalism. Another key institution now under scrutiny is the Liberian judiciary. As the final arbiter of constitutional matters, the courts face growing public pressure to interpret the legality of the EPS directive and its potential chilling effect on political freedoms. Liberian Bar Association President Councillor Sylvester Don emphasized in a recent legal roundtable, the courts must act swiftly to clarify whether a security body can, in essence, penalize individuals for speech without due process. Our Constitution must not become a tool of selective enforcement. Should the judiciary remain passive, the precedent set by the EPS could empower future administrations to erode civil liberties under the guise of national security, a scenario that would severely undermine the democratic framework built since the end of Liberia's civil war. Legal observers are calling for the filing of a writ of prohibition or declaratory judgment at the Supreme Court to challenge the constitutionality of the EPS statement. Civil society mobilization and the return of the streets. In response to what many see as the rising threat of executive overreach, civil society organizations have begun mobilizing. The Liberia Civil Society Council, Women in Peacebuilding Network, WIPNET, YOCEL, Youth Coalition for Electoral Leadership, and the Press Union of Liberia are organizing forums, town hall meetings, and radio debates to educate citizens on their rights. Plans are also underway for a national democracy vigil to be held outside the Capitol building and Supreme Court, calling for a retraction of the EPS statement and a reaffirmation of civil liberties. Student unions from the University of Liberia and Cuttington University have added their voices, with slogans such as "Security is a right, not a reward," and "Silence today, repression tomorrow," trending across social media platforms. This activism echoes the early 2000s post-war civic movement that pressured transitional leaders to adopt democratic reforms. Activists are now demanding that history not be allowed to repeat itself in reverse. The historical lens, Liberia's troubled relationship with security institutions. To fully grasp the gravity of the current EPS directive, one must examine Liberia's historical struggles with state security institutions being weaponized for political ends. During the regimes of former presidents Samuel Doe and Charles Taylor, the misuse of security forces for personal and political vendettas was a defining feature of governance, often with devastating consequences. Under Taylor's presidency, 1997 to 2003, the Special Security Service, SSS, the precursor to today's EPS, was accused of extrajudicial killings, intimidation of political opponents, and harassment of journalists. These abuses contributed significantly to the environment of fear and lawlessness that fueled Liberia's second civil war. After the war, part of the post-conflict restructuring supported by the United Nations, ECOWAS, and other international partners was to professionalize Liberia's security sector. The establishment of the EPS was intended to replace the SSS with a neutral and professional body responsible for the safety of high-ranking officials, not as an arm of political retaliation. As Dr. Ibrahim Nye, a governance researcher at the Sahel Institute, explains, EPS reforms were meant to build trust, neutrality, and accountability. When the institution veers back into the shadows of its predecessor, it betrays years of painstaking institutional rebuilding. Indeed, this regression threatens to undo decades of democratic progress and raises concerns about Liberia's overall post-conflict trajectory. Africawide Parallels, the growing militarization of politics. Liberia's unfolding crisis mirrors a disturbing trend across Africa where security institutions are increasingly politicized. In Guinea, following the 2021 coup by Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, the transitional military government used elite security units to arrest political opponents and suppress protests. In Sierra Leone, opposition parties have repeatedly accused President Bayo's administration of using the Operational Support Division, OSD, to clamp down on dissent, particularly around contested elections. In Uganda, President Yoweri Museveni's use of the Special Forces Command, SFC, to surveil and intimidate opposition leader Robert Kyagulanyi, Bobi Wine, has been widely condemned. Similarly, in Zimbabwe, the ruling ZANU-PF has long used the police and military to disrupt opposition rallies and detain protesters. The pattern is striking. Where political competition intensifies and institutions remain fragile, ruling parties tend to fall back on the coercive arms of the state to maintain control. Liberia now finds itself teetering on that same precipice. The continent must confront a new wave of security state politics that undermines the very principles of electoral democracy, said Chidi Odinkalu, former chair of Nigeria's Human Rights Commission during a recent African governance forum in Dakar. These comparisons are not merely academic, they are instructive. They show the fragility of democratic institutions when not anchored in rule of law and constitutional checks. A constitutional crossroads, what is at stake? At its core, the EPS controversy in Liberia is not just about one agency's directive, it is about the balance of power, constitutionalism, and the survival of democratic norms. If security institutions can strip constitutional entitlements, such as protection for former officials, without judicial oversight, then the rule of law becomes subjective and selective. Article 11 of the Liberian Constitution guarantees that all persons are born equally free and independent and have certain natural, inherent, and inalienable rights. That includes protection from arbitrary state action. The Constitution also places firm restrictions on the powers of the executive branch through the principle of separation of powers under Article 3. Legal experts argue that EPS's current trajectory could eventually require constitutional litigation, possibly in the form of a writ of prohibition or a writ of mandamus at the Supreme Court. These legal remedies would force judicial scrutiny over whether the EPS exceeded its mandate. There is also concern about the chilling effect this move might have on political participation. If high profile figures like Jewel Howard Taylor can be unofficially sanctioned for speaking critically of the government, what message does that send to average citizens or community leaders? Civil military tensions, a brewing storm behind the scenes. While public discourse has been dominated by political and civil society voices, whispers from within Liberia's security and defense architecture suggest unease with the current direction of the Executive Protection Service, EPS. According to sources within the Armed Forces of Liberia, AFL, and the Liberia National Police, LNP, both restructured after the Civil War with international support, some officers view the EPS directive as a politically reckless maneuver that could drag neutral security institutions into partisan conflicts. One senior AFL officer, speaking on condition of anonymity to the Bold African Voice, BAV, remarked, "We have worked hard to rebuild trust with the population. The EPS statement threatens to undo that progress. The military must remain above politics." Historically, the politicization of security forces in Liberia led to devastating outcomes, including the erosion of command structures, the emergence of factional loyalties, and the eventual breakdown of state control. The fear now is that such dynamics could be revived, particularly if rival political groups begin arming themselves under the guise of self-defense in a securitized political climate. Observers also worry about the potential emergence of informal militias or vigilante groups, especially if opposition voices are silenced while certain ruling party affiliates are allowed to issue veiled threats, as was the case with ALCOP chairman Ansu Dula's Masters of Chaos remark. Liberia's military leadership, under the Ministry of National Defense, has so far stayed silent, but diplomatic sources have confirmed that several partners, including ECOWAS and the United States Africa Command, AFRICOM, have flagged the current security politicization as a red light in their ongoing strategic assessments. Liberian Diaspora, a rising voice of resistance. As tensions rise at home, the Liberian diaspora community, particularly in the United States, Canada, and Europe, is becoming increasingly vocal. Diaspora groups have historically played a major role in Liberia's political evolution, including funding opposition movements, influencing international lobbying efforts, and organizing global protests during the Taylor regime. Now, several diaspora-led organizations such as Liberians for Justice and Democracy, LJD, and the Global Alliance of Liberian Professionals, GALP, have issued statements condemning the EPS directive and calling for international mediation. GALP chairwoman Dr. Martha B. Kuhn told BAV via Zoom from Minnesota, "We cannot stand by as the rights of our people are trampled under the guise of security. Liberia's democracy is still fragile, and the diaspora must act as guardians of accountability. Online petitions, targeted emails to U.S. congressional leaders, and calls for a hearing at the U.S. House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Africa are already in motion. There are also efforts underway to lobby ECOWAS and the African Commission on Human and People's Rights to dispatch a fact-finding mission to Liberia ahead of the next electoral cycle. These diaspora interventions could add significant external pressure on the Boakai administration, especially given Liberia's economic reliance on aid, remittances, and international goodwill. Internal pushback, cracks within the government. Though President Joseph Boakai has yet to break his silence on the EPS directive, there are indications of dissent within the ranks of the Unity Party and allied institutions. A source close to the Ministry of Justice, who requested anonymity, disclosed that several legal advisors were uncomfortable with the implications of the directive and had advised against it being made public. Additionally, two legislators from Boakai's own Unity Party, Representative Sando Johnson of Bami County and Senator Augustine Chea of Sino County, have raised questions in internal parliamentary forums, arguing that revoking protection without due process could trigger a constitutional crisis. The Independent Human Rights Commission of Liberia, INCHR, has also reportedly begun compiling a legal brief on the matter, which it plans to present to the Supreme Court and the House Committee on Governance and Human Rights. These internal movements suggest that while the Boakai administration may have intended to project strength and deter radical rhetoric, it may instead be galvanizing a more robust, multi-pronged resistance, both from within and outside government circles. Escalation scenarios. From democratic regression to political unrest. If the current trajectory continues unchecked, Liberia could face a worsening of political polarization, institutional paralysis, and even the reactivation of dormant conflict networks. The possibility of widespread civil unrest, though still remote, cannot be entirely ruled out given the country's volatile history and fragile post-war social fabric. Scenario 1. Institutional erosion and authoritarian drift. In this outcome, the Executive Protection Service, EPS, continues its selective enforcement, while other state institutions remain silent or complicit. The judiciary fails to intervene, and the national legislature opts for political expediency rather than oversight. This sets the stage for increased executive overreach, a silencing of dissent, and the steady normalization of political intimidation. Liberia would then be categorized among partly free or unfree nations in the next Freedom House and Mo Ibrahim Index reports. Scenario 2. Opposition-led mobilization and civil disobedience. Should opposition parties and civil society groups, backed by international support, mobilize citizens to protest peacefully but persistently, the country could enter a phase of political resistance. While this might strengthen democratic norms in the long term, it could also spark violent counter-responses from hardline security actors. The risk of casualties and a descent into law and order crackdowns is heightened if government rhetoric escalates. Scenario 3. Fragmentation within government. If moderate voices within the Boakai administration and Unity Party continue to dissent internally or begin to resign in protest, the administration could experience fragmentation. This could weaken Boakai's authority and open the door to more pluralistic governance, or conversely, to a power vacuum that opportunistic actors could exploit. Peace-building and conflict prevention recommendations. Drawing lessons from Liberia's own peace-building process and from similar contexts like Sierra Leone, Ivory Coast, and the Gambia, a multi-pronged approach to de-escalation is urgently needed. 1. Immediate retraction or clarification of EPS statement. The Executive Protection Service must either rescind or significantly clarify its statement in consultation with the Ministry of Justice and constitutional experts. Any disciplinary or protective decisions concerning public figures must be subject to judicial review or parliamentary oversight. 2. Engagement of regional mediators. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, which played a key role in ending Liberia's civil war and restoring democratic rule, should consider deploying a preventive diplomacy mission to assess the situation and mediate political tensions. 3. Empowerment of the judiciary and human rights institutions. The Supreme Court of Liberia, the Independent Human Rights Commission, INCHR, and other oversight institutions must be allowed to operate without executive interference. Strengthening their operational autonomy and public trust is vital for any peaceful resolution. 4. Dialogue forum involving all political stakeholders. President Boakai, in collaboration with religious and traditional leaders, should convene a national dialogue for democratic consolidation, inviting opposition parties, civil society, security chiefs, and international partners to discuss constitutional protections, electoral safeguards, and post-war reconciliation gaps. 5. Public education and civic engagement. Civic education campaigns, especially in rural and conflict-prone areas, should be expanded to prevent misinformation, reinforce democratic values, and de-escalate tensions at the grassroots level. As Lema Gbowie, Liberian Nobel Peace Prize laureate, once said, "Peace is not the absence of war, but the presence of justice, accountability, and voice for the voiceless." Comparative Lessons, Gambia, Malawi, and Ghana. In the Gambia, former President Yahya Jammeh attempted to cling to power after electoral defeat in 2016, but a unified regional front, led by ECOWAS, and robust domestic mobilization forced a peaceful transition. Liberia could benefit from such a multilateral approach before tensions escalate further. Malawi's Constitutional Court annulled a fraudulent election in 2020, reinforcing judicial independence and democratic resilience. Liberia's judiciary could draw inspiration from that case to assert its constitutional authority. Ghana, despite political tensions, has maintained democratic continuity through strong electoral institutions and a deeply entrenched culture of peaceful alternation of power. Liberia's Electoral Commission, media, and religious bodies could study Ghana's post-election dispute resolution frameworks as a preventative model. Public sentiment across counties, a nation on edge but not defeated. Liberia's growing political tension is not just an elite conversation in Monrovia. It is reverberating through the towns, villages, and counties where memories of war remain vivid, and the fragility of peace is deeply understood. From Bong to Lofa, Nimba to Maryland, the EPS directive and escalating political rhetoric are being discussed in market stalls, radio stations, church gatherings, and university classrooms. In Gabarnga, Bong County, a stronghold of former Vice President Jewel Howard Taylor, locals expressed concern that the government is targeting her unfairly. At Radio Gabarnga, a panel of youth activists debated whether the country was returning to an era of selective justice. One student, Fatu Mulba, said on air, "If they can threaten Jewel Howard Taylor, what about the rest of us? We need justice, not threats." In Lofa County, the home base of President Boakai, opinions are more divided. While some residents support the EPS's position on curbing inflammatory speech, others fear that it is being used to intimidate critics. A local imam in Voinjama, speaking after Friday prayers, urged the president to calm tensions before they get out of hand. The people voted for peace, not power games. In Grand Bassa County, known for its historically active youth movements, civil society groups have begun organizing peace parades under the theme "Voices for Justice, Not Chaos." Participants wear white and carry signs quoting Liberia's Constitution and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. These grassroots initiatives signal that the population is not passive in the face of mounting threats. They are engaged, alert, and increasingly organized. Role of traditional and religious leaders, guardians of peace or silent observers. Liberia's traditional chiefs and religious leaders have long served as intermediaries between the people and the state, especially in moments of national crisis. During the civil wars, they played critical roles in negotiating ceasefires, facilitating reconciliation, and preserving community cohesion when the formal state collapsed. Today, their silence or selective engagement on the current crisis is both noticeable and alarming. While the Interreligious Council of Liberia, IRCL, has issued general appeals for calm, it has yet to address the EPS directive or the inflammatory rhetoric coming from political elites. However, Sources close to the National Traditional Council of Chiefs and Elders confirm that internal consultations are underway. The council, chaired by Chief Zanzan Karwar, may issue a position paper in the coming days urging the president to de-escalate the political climate and uphold constitutional protections. The Catholic Bishops' Conference, known for its bold statements during the Taylor regime, is also reportedly drafting a pastoral letter that will call for a restoration of constitutional civility, separation of powers, and respect for all political voices. The involvement of these moral authorities could be a game changer. Their unique influence, especially in rural communities where political parties often have limited reach, makes them essential actors in any peace-building or national dialogue effort. A roadmap toward democratic renewal ahead of 2025 elections. With midterm and local elections expected in 2025, Liberia stands at a historic crossroads. What happens in the next few months will either cement its democratic credentials or return it to the unpredictable cycle of political confrontation and fear. A democratic roadmap must include the following priorities. 1. Legal clarity and accountability for state institutions. A Supreme Court review of the EPS directive is crucial. The court must assert its role as the guardian of the Constitution and ensure that state security agencies remain accountable. 2. Strengthening the National Elections Commission, NEC. The NEC must be given the full resources, independence, and support it needs to run credible elections. Political parties, both ruling and opposition, must commit publicly to the NEC's authority and outcomes. 3. Implementation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, recommendations. The long-stalled TRC report holds the keys to national healing. Revisiting its recommendations, especially on justice and reconciliation, would address the unfinished business of post-war governance. 4. Launch of a national dialogue platform, a formal platform for inclusive political dialogue, chaired by independent civic and religious leaders, would provide a structured space for grievances to be aired and addressed before they spiral into violence. 5. International observation and mediation presence. The African Union, ECOWAS, and the United Nations should prepare to deploy early pre-election observation teams to monitor political dynamics and offer mediation when necessary. Voices from the ground. Testimonies of hope and fear. As part of our investigation, the Bold African Voice, BAV, reached out to ordinary Liberians across counties for their reflections on the current political climate. Their voices highlight a nation torn between hard-earned peace and the growing fear of relapse. Mamie Wessa, a market woman in Buchanan, said, "We survived war, Ebola, and COVID. We don't want another fight over politics. Let the leaders talk and fix their problems without dragging us." James Colley, a motorcycle taxi rider in Ganta, Nimba County, remarked, "EPS or no EPS, we know how violence starts. First, it is small threats, then big guns. We are not ready for that again. The government should stop the threats." Beatrice Nyanplu, a student activist at the University of Liberia, added, "Democracy is not only about elections, it's about voice, respect, and protection. If the government is afraid of criticism, then it is not strong. Let the EPS protect lives, not threaten them." These testimonies echo a common plea. Liberians want peace, justice, and leadership grounded in law, not power plays. They believe the solution lies in dialogue, constitutionalism, and the courage to reject the politics of fear. Advice to African leaders. Lessons from Liberia. The situation unfolding in Liberia is a cautionary tale for African leaders across the continent. It shows how quickly democratic gains can unravel when power is misused, and how vital it is to maintain a clear separation between state security institutions and political interests. Here are 5 key lessons for leaders. 1. Respect constitutional norms. Security services must never be used as tools of political suppression. The Constitution is a contract with the people, and every leader must uphold it, especially when it is inconvenient. 2. Embrace political dissent. Opposition voices are not enemies of the state. They are essential for democratic balance. Suppressing criticism does not create unity, it breeds resentment. 3. Prioritize institutional integrity. Independent institutions like the judiciary, electoral bodies, and human rights commissions must be shielded from partisan control. Their independence is the backbone of long-term peace and prosperity. 4. Avoid the militarization of politics. Historical experiences, from Liberia to Guinea, Sudan to Ethiopia, prove that militarized rhetoric and the politicization of armed forces lead to national trauma, not stability. 5. Lead with dialogue, not intimidation. African leadership must evolve from command and control tactics to participatory governance rooted in dialogue, humility, and inclusivity. Key messages: a call to conscience and action. Democracy is fragile, but it is repairable if political actors recommit to rule of law and inclusive governance. The misuse of security services erodes trust and fuels instability, the exact opposite of what they are intended to prevent. Liberians remain vigilant, hopeful, and courageous, but they deserve leadership that matches their resilience. The international community and civil society must act now, not when it's too late. Africa's future depends on today's leadership choices, and Liberia's moment is a test for the entire continent. Liberia now stands at a crossroads between regression and renewal, silence and resistance, fear and freedom. The path it chooses will not only shape its own destiny, but serve as a mirror to the democratic aspirations of the African continent. The world is watching, the people are speaking. The question remains, will the leaders listen? Thank you for watching The Bold African Voice, BAV, where truth echoes louder than power. If Africa is to rise, its democracies must stand firm. Liberia's unfolding crisis is more than a domestic matter. It's a lesson for the continent. We urge our leaders to protect freedom, not fear it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update on Africa's most critical stories.